are talking The Adventures of Maid, Marion, and this one is written, directed and produced by Bill Thomas and stars Sophie Craig as Marion. You've also got Dominic Anderson as Robin Hood. Now this is actually a kind of sequel, so to speak, to the kind of traditional kind of Robin Hood story. It actually takes place sometime after the kind of the main adventure, if you like, that most people are familiar with, and that has been done before. We have seen movies and shows going to take place, for example, probably the most high profile being the Sean Connery movie Robin and Marion. And in this particular story, the main adventure has happened. The Sheriff of Nottingham has been banished from the kingdom, and Robin Hood for the last 3 years have actually been in the Holy Lands fighting with King Richard. Now, in the meantime, Maid Marion has been serving in the local convent as a novice nun, but in kind of downtime and in secret, she's been stalking the forest as a kind of hooded vigilante, kind of really taking over from Robin Hood. But Robin Hood is on his way back now because of the change of status in the Holy Lands, and Marion goes to meet him, but they are ambushed, and Robin Hood is severely injured. And it's up to basically Maid Marion to try and defend her true love against the returning Sheriff of Nottingham and his group of mercenary warriors who want to hunt down their former adversary. Now, what will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss The Adventures of Maid Marion. Now, as I mentioned, I'm actually quite a fan of the Robin Hood mythos. Robin Hood show is one of my favourite TV shows of all time, and I quite like things that take a little bit of a different take on the kind of mythos, adding things to it. This is obviously a kind of a female-led, feminist kind of spin on the Robin Hood mythos, with Maid Marion being our kind of centerpiece kind of character here. What works? So a small thing here, but I did like the inclusion of adding a little bit of kind of nods and winks to kind of like English kind of lore and locations and characters and things like this. For example, they mentioned Alan a Dale, which is probably, you know, a little bit of a deep cut in regards to kind of English lore there, but things like Kirklees Abbey as well, which is, you know, famous kind of location within that. So I kind of quite like some of the kind of clearly the research that has been done in regards to the kind of the original Robin Hood poems and kind of media that have kind of been out there for. It's a small thing, but I quite appreciated it. I will say I do think here the actual camera work is quite impressive, especially for a low budget movie. A mixing up of different kind of camera angles to give it kind of lots of kind of variety, you know, drone shots, but not too many, don't worry, they don't go overboard with it, but you know, a fairly good kind of bit behind the camera. The cinematography is that everything is kind of quite well shot. I think obviously this is primarily an externally shot movie out in the kind of the forests with kind of various ruins and you know, woodland areas. And I think it looks great because of that. Actually, probably expected a Robin Hood movie, to be honest with you, but they do a good job here of scouting some decent kind of locations, some old, you know, castles and things like that, which I thought was all pretty good. The movie is relatively kind of well paced, with you know, action kind of sequences peppered throughout the movie, you know, culminating, I think, in probably the best act of the movie, the third act, where I do think the plot comes into its strongest point. We'll talk about the first two acts again, but I think the third act is definitely the kind of the strongest, and I think it adds more layers of intrigue into what, to be honest with you, was otherwise somewhat of a bland movie. But the third act, I think, does pick it up, so at least this kind of movie adds, you know, it kind of it ends fairly strongly, I kind of would say it like that as well. I also liked, if it doesn't do a hell of a lot with it, we get a little bit of a peek at kind of the social political kind of situation in regards to the lords and the corruption kind of behind the scenes and things like that. Again, this all takes place in the kind of the third act, which you won't necessarily seen much of it before then. I actually quite liked our Maid Marion. I thought she did a reasonable job here. That's a kind of a leading kind of lady here. And the action sequences are fairly muted, I will say, but they kind of reminded me of like the old-fashioned kind of Robin Hood sort of fight scenes from like older movies and the kind of the TV shows, which kind of gave me this weird nostalgic feeling, I have to say. You know, we're talking no blood here really, you know, and kind of people just dying with straight away from, you know, hits to the stomach and things like that. It's, you know, it's a little silly, but it kind of weirdly nostalgic. I have to say, which is bizarre. What doesn't work for me, the main problem for me is actually Robin Hood himself, in a number of ways. So the actor that they've chosen to play Robin Hood, the guy called Dominic Anderson, primarily a male model from what I understand, he's way too young. Way too young to be this version of Robin Hood. Now, had this been Robin Hood at the beginning of his career, I could buy it. But we're meant to believe we've already had his kind of main adventures have already happened in this kind of universe. So, he's already kind of formed the group of the merry men and all of this. He's defeated the Sheriff of Nottingham. And then even after that, he spent the last 3 years of this in the Holy Lands with King Richard. So we're meant to believe he's had quite a long kind of like career of doing this, but the guy looks about 18. I mean, are we meant to believe that Robin Hood in his prime was probably about this age going by it? It doesn't really make any sense. Like Little John and Friar Tucker could have cast appropriately, and I get Robin Hood maybe would have been younger than them, but it's way too young. Anyway, there's that. But also Robin Hood is completely nerfed in this movie, obviously to kind of put the Maid Marion character as the main kind of action hero in here, but they've made him look like a real dumbass. I mean, Robin Hood doesn't come across as an intelligent character, he doesn't come across as a capable character, he comes across as a buffoon, to be honest with you, and is taken out relatively kind of easily, and really doesn't do anything in the movie. Now, I get that you want to sideline Robin to have Marion be the kind of the focus here, but I have to say they could have done it in a way where it didn't make Robin Hood, it didn't put Robin Hood down so you could put Marion up, if that makes sense. So that was kind of bad. There's a hell of a lot of monologuing from our bad guys in this movie. I mean, they would have won. They have opportunities to defeat our heroes multiple times in the movie, but they don't. They just stand there monologuing. They're going to kill him, but they would have this big monologue first, multiple times through the movie. In one instance, they capture Marion, tie her up, and then just leave her unguarded. Then she just gets captured again and tied up again straight afterwards. So what was the point of that scene? It was completely redundant, and it didn't make any sense. It made these kind of characters look idiotic. And that is unfortunately one of the through lines of this movie is these characters all seem idiotic. The movie, the first 2 acts are quite dull. Now I will say, as I said, it does pick up in the 3rd act, where I think we have a bit more plot coming in, but that's leaving all of the kind of the juicy plot right until the 3rd act. The first 2 acts, albeit there's a couple of kind of action sequences that are, as I mentioned, somewhat neutered, but they're quite dull, and not a lot happens, and all you're doing is assassinating the character of Robin Hood, unfortunately, and I don't think it helps the Marion character, because you just feel this Robin Hood seemed like the most idiot. He's like Robin Hood Men in Tights, yeah, so that wasn't particularly good. The dialogue is a little bit of a mixed bag. We have kind of somewhat modern colloquialisms mixed in with attempts at kind of Old English here. I don't know. It didn't really kind of quite work. It's a little bit too modern dialogue, driven in some ways. And another thing is, so just the presentation of the movie was a little lacking for me. Now I understand, obviously, you have a low budget, but we have all our characters with perfect hair. They're all kind of like clean clothes. We're meant to believe they're living in the woods and they've been out in battle and things like that, but everyone's costumes are really kind of like new and neat and everything like that. They needed to be kind of dirtied up, and we're meant to believe this is like, the Middle Ages at the end of the day. So it just doesn't, the attention to detail was a little lacking, I think, in the presentation, if I'm completely honest. And this doesn't come across, I understand there's budgetary constraints, but I don't think the critiques I'm having are necessarily levied at a budgetary issue. So I think there's some stuff that could be done here that could have made the movie more kind of like realistic, I suppose, a bit more gritty, a bit more kind of like, a bit more kind of earnest, that doesn't involve budget. So the movie is a little bit of a neutered affair. It feels kind of like a TV show that was aimed for kids because the dialogue is somewhat basic, the action is bloodless, and the story itself is kind of, you know, simplistic until you can get to the third act, and there it's kind of maybe a little bit too crammed in really for its own good. So I don't think this is necessarily a bad film. I think there's some elements that I enjoyed. I think it was certainly shot well and the locations were good and everything. I quite like some of the references. And I even liked our Marion, but I think some of the acting from our other characters wasn't brilliant. And the dialogue certainly didn't help, and the way they were written, I think, were poor here. And I sometimes see this with where it's one man behind the whole thing. I think this is, you know, why you need to have more of a collaborative process to kind of like have people push back on ideas that maybe, you know, one person can't see on their own. But it's not a bad movie if you like low budget kind of like medieval fantasy. This might be okay for you. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.